In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
So I want to be clear, I deeply respect the attempts of the Revised Common Lectionary, the kind of schedule of readings we're given throughout the year in these late summer and early fall weeks, their attempt to walk you through the narrative of the Hebrew Bible. The problem, though, is we're kind of running out of the year, and so they're rushing along a little bit, and so you're being set down in the middle of some pretty bizarre readings and stories in these weeks without much background as to what in the world is going on and how any of this relates to the good news of our God, leading the poor preacher to decide to either leave you confused or give it a shot. So, for example, in the Hebrew Bible reading for today, the lectionary is trying to expose you to the story of Esther. Not one of the most well-known stories of the Bible. Probably not many of you could sketch out for me the general narrative, but that's okay. The best way they could figure out how to give you some of Esther was to throw in a few verses of chapter 7 and a few from chapter 9 and kind of hope for the best. So in this reading, we hear Esther plead for the lives of her people. The king assents to her pleading, and one of the eunuchs of the king suggests that Haman, apparently the person who conspired against Esther's people, should be hanged. So they hang him. And then Mordecai, the person Haman had apparently built the gallows for, Mordecai sounds out word that the Jews have been saved and they should celebrate the day as a feast. The text doesn't explain why this is important, but if you're familiar with Judaism, you'll recognize this as the origin of the Feast of Purim, right? You all caught that? No, that's okay. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. But despite the strange way a portion of Esther is kind of just dumped into the lectionary, this is actually a fantastic story from the Hebrew Bible, and it's a story that I believe has significant resonance for our own day and time, for such a time as this. This woman, Esther, for whom the book is named, is unbelievable. She is, in the words of one scholar, an orphaned cousin of an exiled people in a far-flung province of a shaken empire, and she moves kings. Even more powerful, because Esther, if you know the rest of the story, is the victim of sex trafficking, but she rises from the evil of this world to bring safety to her marginalized and exiled people. Let me tell you the story. Esther begins with the Persian emperor Ahasuerus. And we are clear at the start of this story, Ahasuerus is not a good man. At the start of the book, Ahasuerus is throwing a 180-day banquet for his court. He knows how to throw a party. Good night. Half a year of celebration. And then he follows it by a 7-day banquet for everyone in the city to come. And on the 7th day of the banquet, Ahasuerus commands his queen, Vashti, to display her beauty in parade in front of the people. Vashti refuses. I like Vashti. She says no, which infuriates the king. He removes from her position, and he issues a decree that, quote, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike, and that, quote, every man should be master in his own house. He's a classy guy. Nothing makes a woman more likely to honor her husband than a decree requiring it. Woo! So a little bit of time goes by. The emperor stops being so angry, but he gets lonesome because now he doesn't have a wife. You see, the thing is, when you get rid of your wife, then you don't have a wife. That's how that works. So he gets really lonesome, and the officials recommend that, how about this? The provincial commissioners should gather all of the virgins and bring them to the capital so the king can pick a new wife. Like I said, he's a classy guy. Yeah. So it's in the midst of this court intrigue in the Persian Empire, this story of sexism and quite literal sexual trafficking, that we first meet Esther. Well, actually, first we meet Mordecai, then we'll get to Esther. So the Jewish people had, at this point in their history, they'd been carried off into exile by the Babylonian Empire. Then the Babylonian Empire was overcome by the Persian Empire. There's always a bigger fish. So the exiles and refugees of ancient Israel are now a part of that kingdom, the Persian kingdom. Esther's parents had died when she was young, and to be an orphan in that world was a terribly vulnerable place. So Mordecai, her cousin, he adopted her as his own daughter, that he'd take care of her. But Esther was also a beautiful young woman, and so when the provincial commissioners arrived, they took her, along with the other young women, to the capital. And Esther's chosen then by the emperor to be a part of his harem. And Mordecai tries to keep an eye on her every day. Mordecai walks by the harem to check on her, to see if she's okay, knowing that her well-being's out of his hands. Mordecai's a good man, doing the best he can in a horrible situation. A little bit of time goes by, and Esther is chosen among all the women in the harem to be the king's new queen. But she never tells the king of her Jewish ancestry, of her people, of where she comes from. A little more time goes by, and Mordecai discovers there's been a plot to assassinate the emperor. He warns of the danger, tells Esther what's going on, and they catch the conspirators. Mordecai's service to the emperor is entered into the record. A little more time goes by, and the emperor appoints a new viceroy, Haman. So this is what I got to tell you. So when they celebrate the Feast of Purim in Judaism, they tell this story twice, at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And when they tell it, it's participatory. So like everyone kind of boos, and whenever you hear Haman, you boo, and he's a bad man. You're like, oh no, it's Haman, the wicked Haman. And you go, boo! So, time goes by, the emperor appoints a new viceroy, Haman. There you go. Haman, he's a proud man. And Mordecai, as a devout Jew, will not bow to him, given his royal status, because Mordecai bows only to his God. And Haman, he's furious. He creates a plan to kill Mordecai, constructing gallows to do it. And also, not just to kill Mordecai, but to commit genocide against the entire Jewish people, to wipe them out. He doesn't tell the king his full plan, but kind of tricks the emperor into agreeing to all of this. Gets permission for this dastardly plan to go forward. So Mordecai, he's mourning, he's grief-stricken for what's about to befall his people, not just him alone, but his whole people. He goes to the palace. He finally is able to get into the palace to talk to Esther. He begs Esther, Esther, you've got to intervene. You've got to do something. But Esther says, I can't. It's against the law for anyone to even enter the emperor's court unless you've been invited. I haven't been invited for a month. And Mordecai persists, saying the great verse, my favorite verse in the whole story of Esther. Who knows? Perhaps you've come to royal dignity for just a time as this. So Esther agrees. She asks Mordecai, gather all of the Jews in fasting and prayer for me. And full of fear and trembling, Esther goes into the courtroom. She could be killed. Thankfully, the emperor extends his scepter, demonstrating that she's welcome, so she comes in. And Esther's crafty. She knows how to work with this king who's taken her. So he says, what do you want? I'll give you anything, even half of my kingdom, my love. She says, well, let's not get to that. Let me throw you a banquet, all right? Ahasuerus loves his banquet. So she throws a banquet for the king. Wonderful banquet. She says, you should and maybe even invite Haman to come to the banquet. They have a great time, but she doesn't ask for what she wants. She throws another banquet the next day, and at that banquet, the king says, come on, tell me, half my kingdom is yours. What do you want, my love? And then we hear in the reading for today her request. Save my people, because they're going to be destroyed and annihilated. The emperor, on hearing this, is enraged that anyone would put together a plan to arrange the death of the queen's people. Now that he knows that they're the Jewish people, he's enraged. He says, "Who's done this thing?" This guy does not remember anything he does. Like literally, you gave permission, but it's okay. Ahasuerus is kind of a bumbling fool. So he says, "Who's done this?" And Esther says, It's Haman. As we heard in the first reading for today. And they hang him on the scaffold that he built for Mordecai. Nice, right? Nice. You like that. If I was a fan. And then Mordecai sends out a note to all of the Jews saying they've been saved on this day, and so celebrate this day. It's a day of feasting because we've been saved. Now, like I said, when the story is still told today on the Jewish Feast of Purim in full detail, people dress up for it, all kinds of outfits. They boo and hiss at the right parts, just like you did. They cheer when salvation arrives. They send gifts to their friends. They give charity to the poor. They eat a festive meal, probably not the smoked pork we're going to be eating, but their own festive meal, right? A little bit of a slow burn on that joke. The Jewish people cheer, of course, because they find themselves in this story. They know this is just a story from long, long ago, but this is their own story. Because as we know too well, the Persian emperor will not be the last person to oppress the Jewish people, the last person even to attempt genocide against them, to wipe them out. And so this story, a story in which someone who is the most vulnerable of all is able to stand up to a king and save her people through cunning and charm. This is a story that brings them hope, along with a reminder that every person, no matter how wealthy and powerful, and no matter how oppressed and poor, every person must always ask, what I can do in such a time as this to lift up and care for my people. I told you it's a good story, right? But the question remains, is it just a good story, or is it also a good story of God's good news for us? Because you know what's odd about Esther? It's one of two books in the Bible in which God's name never appears. How fascinating. And yet here we are, telling this story and calling it the word of the Lord to us. And I want to suggest to you this morning that I think the story of Esther is good news of God for us. It's a story that's particularly good news on today, the day of our harvest festival and pledge ingathering, the day that we celebrate how each of you have committed a pledge of your time, talent, and treasure to the work of St. John's in the year to come. It's a good day to tell this story because we see in this story evil on full display. Everything from Esther losing everything to being turned into a sexual consort for a prideful emperor, to the petty jealousy of Haman, who can't stand for anyone not to treat him the way he should be treated, something that never infects us. We see evil on full display, not just an evil you can boo and hiss at, but an evil that you know lurks in your own heart. We see the evil in this world that sets us awake at night with fear and anxiety, and we see that evil in this story undone. And how is it undone? By the courage of a young girl in captivity. Her courage and her commitment to use every power, limited as it may be at her disposal, to save her people. Make no mistake, Esther could have kept quiet. She could have kept what little dignity she still had and saved herself, but Esther risked everything to save her community. And by doing so, she undid a plot of genocide. She unseated corrupt government officials. She literally changed an empire because she was willing to risk what she had for the good of others. We always celebrate our harvest festival and ingathering of pledges each year by moving the Feast of St. Michael and All Angels to this Sunday, the last Sunday in September. We do that because Michaelmas celebrates the power of St. Michael in defeating the devil and through God's power throwing down evil in this world. And that idea of using whatever goodness you have in your life to cast down evil, I can't think of a better description for what a pledge is. I can't think of a better reason to describe why my family pledges to St. John's. All of the ways that this congregation, all of the ways that you cast down evil in this world is why my family has no problem sitting down each fall, doing the math on what our income will be in the coming year, and then giving 10% of that to this work, to the work that you do, because we believe in you. Now, when you hear the story of Esther, I hope you never find yourself in Esther's spot. I hope you never find yourself in such a place of oppression and fear. But if you ever do, then I hope that, like Esther, you will see what good you still cling to. And you will ask, not how can I save this little bit I have, but how can I use that good to still bring goodness to others, even in the midst of my calamity? I hope you do. My guess as well is that probably few of you feel like St. Michael the Archangel either, swooping down on mighty wings to defeat Satan. But on those days you do feel the might of God's love burning in your heart. I hope you ask what good you can bring to others by casting down evil in your own world. The truth is, all of us are usually somewhere between Esther and St. Michael, between their experience. But Mordecai's advice to Esther in this book is still applicable to each and every one of this. Who knows? Perhaps you've come to this moment. Perhaps you've come to this experience for such a time as this. So look around you and ask, what has God given you in your life? And how can you use what you have at such a time as this day, this moment, this world we're living in? How can you use what you have for such a time as this to undo and cast down evil, to expand God's love and mercy and justice in this world? Don't be quiet, beloved of God. Don't be content to keep what you have like Esther could have. Also, don't just tell others what they should be doing. We've got enough of that in this world. We could probably use a good deal less. Instead, take what you have and put it to use in such a time as this. Put it to use for the work of God in our own time, because believe me, God has placed you in this moment in your life for such a time as this. God has placed you there. And you can cast down evil. You can give love to a people who feel forgotten and lost and marginalized. You can save them. You can do these things because of the power of God within you. Amen.